All right. So welcome everyone. Thank you very much for joining me this fourth session about Bhagavad Gita. We'll get started with a chant. Please sit straight. Gently bring your palms together near your heart and close your eyes. I might keep my eyes open just in case anyone else is joining us, but you go ahead and close your eyes. And also please let me mute your microphones here. Okay. All right. Carol, do you mind muting your microphone? Or yeah, okay, I did it for you. That's okay. All right, sorry. So take a deep inhalation for a chant of Om. Om. Once again. Once more. Please repeat after me. Sahana vavatu. Sahanau bhunaktu. Sahaviryam karavavahai. Tejasvi navadhitamastu. Ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Meditation on Bhagavad Gita. Parthaya Pratibodhitam Bhagavata Narayanena Swayam Vyasena Grathitam Purana Munina Madhye Mahabharatam Advaitamrita Varshinim Bhagavatim Ashtadasha Adhyayinim Amba Tvam Anusandadhami Bhagavad Gita Bhavadveshini. Gratitude to Vyasa, the author of the book. Namostute Vyasa Vishala Buddhe Pulla Aravinda Ayata Patranetra Yena Tvaya Bharata Tailapurnaha Prajvalito Jnanamayaha Pradeepaha. Gratitude to Krishna, the teacher of the wisdom of Bhagavad Gita. Vasudeva Sutam Devam Kamsa Chanura Mardanam Devaki Paramanandam Krishnam Vande Jagadgurum. Om. You may gently open your eyes and relax your hands. So once again, welcome to all of you to this session, fourth session of Bhagavad Gita. Before I begin with today's talk, any questions if you have from any of the previous sessions that we have discussed, the topics, etc., please feel free to ask now.
Yes, I have a question with regards to the theme of karma that you addressed last video.
Okay.
I always found it strange to think that as a human being accumulating karma, that we could be reborn as, you know, an animal or mineral, like you were mentioning. And it seems counter reason, let's say. So I was wondering, where in the sacred scriptures does it mention that, and how does it describe that process? Like, how does it give that a reason, if it does at all?
Can I ask Michael why you think it is counter reason?
Because I feel that the quality of karma that we're generating as a human, it seems strange to me that that karma would be translated into it's almost translated into, like, I don't want to say an inferior species, because I don't like to make those kinds of divisions, but it's almost like it doesn't make sense to me that, for example, if we take like the school analogy, like if you're going to college, then why would you go back to kindergarten, you know?
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, let me clarify. Animals, plants, birds, etc., are not considered as inferior species, as you rightly refrained from saying, but they are considered lower forms of life. Why? Only because of the capabilities of our mind and nervous system. Okay, that's the only reason. Otherwise, all life is considered equally sacred in Vedic philosophy or yogic philosophy, right from the smallest ant to the highest human being. Why? It is the same Purusha that is manifest in the form of an ant or a mineral or a plant or an animal or a human. So all life energy is considered equally sacred. But life form is definitely more evolved in human beings, in the sense of more capabilities of mind-body system. So I think it is okay to use the expression lower forms of life. Okay, so it is so I guess, in other words, Vedic philosophy distinguishes between energy of life and form of life. So as far as the energy of life is concerned, which is known as Purusha or Atman or pure consciousness, it's across the board the same thing. So in simple words, let me put it this way. It is the same soul, whether it is in the body of an ant or a human being. So that is equally sacred. But only the form of life, meaning the physical form. Obviously, a human being has more complicated nervous system as well as a more evolved mind and capabilities of the mind and so on. So it is considered as one of the best. Let me put it that way. And even though I haven't gone into it, in the Vedic philosophy or yogic philosophy, there are higher forms of life also. Okay, so human form is like in the middle. There is lower forms of life in terms of physical evolutionary journey, and there is higher forms of life also. I haven't gone into higher forms of life because that might distract us from the focus of this course, but there is that too. But so that is that one thing. Next one, why, having been born as a human being, would I go back to being an animal or a bird or something like that? The idea is that in all these lower forms of life, and this is also one of the reasons why they are considered as lower forms of life, they don't have what we call as free will, right? In other words, they don't make decisions based on logical thinking like human beings can do. Most of the time, almost 100% of the time, I guess I could say, animals are governed by natural instincts, okay, without going too deeply into animal psychology. So all that they do, broadly speaking, is 4 activities. That is eating, sleeping, protecting themselves, and reproducing. Okay. Other than that, they don't have logical thinking or analytical thinking and so on and so forth. So in that sense also, they are considered as lower forms of life. In the case of human being, he has the highest power in what is called as buddhi in Sanskrit language, or discerning intellect, meaning man knows what is good and what is bad. So the expectation naturally is that so this is a great power that nature has given only to human species. I think it is Spider-Man who said that great power comes with great responsibility, right? So so man has the great responsibility to make sure that the discerning intellect that he has is properly utilized, that man doesn't take it for granted, that, oh, I'm a human being, I can do whatever I want to do now. No, the actions, choices, the options that humans exercise, they have consequences. So the idea is that if we exercise those consequences, yes, we will still be reborn as human being, but there is a possibility, okay, it is not a guarantee, but there is a possibility that if man chooses to exercise this free will in an unwise manner, then he can go back to lower forms of life. But the good news is that it is not like he's being consigned to eternal hell or something like that. So whatever lessons he has to learn in lower forms of life, he will learn, and the universe will again bring him back up to human life. Okay, human form of life as a human species. So at least hopefully he has exercised, he has learned those good lessons, because even though we are calling them as lower forms of life, only from the viewpoint of capabilities of the nervous system and the mind, there are many lessons that we can learn from them. Like if you take trees, for example, trees are always giving. Even if somebody throws a stone at the tree will reward that person with a fruit or a vegetable and not hit that person back, right? So these are all the lessons that will be deeply embedded in the subconsciousness when the soul goes through all of these processes of evolution. It's the same with animals also. Animals, even if we take animals like tigers or lions, which are a little bit violent in their nature, they will kill only to eat. And once their stomach is full, they won't kill. Even if they see a deer passing by, if they are happy they had their meal, they will let it pass. They won't jump on it and kill. Meaning what? They will do negative things like a killing only as much as is necessary because of their natural instincts. They won't do beyond that. Whereas if you take man, I hope I'm not ruffling any feathers by saying this, man hunts and kills for pleasure, right? So like this, the idea is that man has a lot of power. So he better exercise it very carefully and cautiously so that he doesn't go back down the chain. But there is only that possibility. Okay, so man is aware and man is cautious about the choice he's making. Okay, so hopefully that answers your question. Okay, and as much as possible, universe tries to resolve the karma that we do, especially as human beings, in the same life. Only those things which cannot be resolved in this life will get postponed, and then the next life will be determined based on whatever karmic balance we still have outstanding, let's say at the moment of death. Okay, hopefully that sets you at rest. Any other questions? Okay, all right, so so I think I mentioned here in the passing that as much as karma is important, karma is not the only thing that is governing our life. Okay, we talked about it, I think, in the last session, that our karma is important to understand because it determines three critical things about our future lives. Future life. One is the species of life. When I am right now, I'm a human being, but after I die, am I going to be reborn as a human being or an animal or a bird, whatever it is, or even a higher form of life, as I've just introduced. So the idea is that whether I go to lower form of life or higher form of life, ultimately I come back to the middle again. I come back to the human form. So if I do really, really bad karma, really, really negative karma, killing people, really bad things like that, only in those extreme cases, the person will be going down the chain of evolution. Otherwise, most of the people, the way we lead our lives, if I have been a decent human being, that's okay. I will most probably be reborn as a human being only. Again, this is known only to the universe. Human intelligence is not privy to this kind of calculations, so to speak. But the idea is that whatever bad karma that I performed, once that is over, okay, once I experience it in lower forms of life, universe will bring me back again to human level, which is like the middle of the species. Then similarly, if I do great karma, then I will be born as a higher form of life. Once again, excuse me, I'm not going to go into too much about these higher forms of life at the moment. But whatever good karma that made me evolve into higher form of life, once that good karma is over, again I come back to human form of life. So human form of life is considered very, very significant in this whole chain of evolution. Why? Because only in human form we can practice spirituality, get enlightened, and get out of this whole cycle of life and death. So in other words, just like there is very little possibility of animals getting enlightened, there is very little possibility that even higher beings get enlightened. Okay, so everybody still has to come to the soul still has to come into human form of life, so it can. Why? Because here is where you have the ability to discriminate between good and bad, and you should make the choices correctly. That is the responsibility that lies in human form. And only when we are able to do that properly, then we experience what is called enlightenment. And then we are not stuck in this cycle of life and death anymore. So that is the power that comes with the human form of life. And also, it comes with a commensurate measure of responsibility also. So we better be aware of, take responsibility for our lives and for our journey, as well as for our spiritual evolution. That is the whole message behind this thing. So, as I mentioned earlier, it is not just karma that governs our lives. Apart from karma, there are two other factors which govern our life, and we'll come to that maybe a little bit later. But let us focus now that we are born as human beings. What are the goals of our life? Why we are born? What is the purpose of this? So the purpose of human existence is basically fourfold according to Bhagavad Gita. What are those four things? Dharma, Artha, Kama, and Moksha. So let us chant these words one time, just so we get a little bit familiar with the Sanskrit words, because these words are very tricky to translate into single English words. Okay, so please repeat after me. Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha. So once again, dharma, artha, kama, and moksha. So let me briefly explain these 4 goals of life. First one is dharma. As we discussed last time, dharma has many dimensions of meaning. Dharma stands for moral and ethical code. So okay, that is the first thing, moral and ethical code, meaning what is the right thing for me to do under given circumstances, any given circumstances. Second thing is dharma is the purpose of life. So that is the first responsibility we have, to discover what is the essential purpose of our life. What is the predominant theme of my life? I need to discover that. Now, second thing is, it is not enough to discover that. We have to have the courage to follow that too, without getting distracted by other things. And I will expand on this maybe next week, next session. I just wanted to throw that point there. So dharma means basically what is the purpose of one's life. So once you discover this kind of forms the framework of your life. So your entire life is defined by this dharma. Okay. So everything you do will have to be, it's a good idea that it is in accordance with your dharma. Once again, remember, dharma means a moral, ethical code, and also my duty towards other people, whether it is family or friends or even the community at large. Okay, so all of these dimensions are included in that one word dharma. Okay, it is very important to bear all of these things in mind whenever we use the word dharma, rather than have only one thing in mind. Okay, so yes, it is the purpose of life. It is also duty in life. Okay, my duty towards others, family, friends, the community, the world at large, all of these things. And also how I am supposed to lead my life. This is also included. But at the same time, my purpose of life cannot be causing harm to other people, whether it is family or friends or the community at large. Meaning I cannot say, oh, I have a family to take care of, that is my duty, my dharma towards my wife and children. But I am not educated. All I can do is rob and kill people, and I want to do that to take care of my family. No, robbing and killing people to take care of your family is not dharma. Doesn't work that way. Whatever dharma that you claim to be yours has to be beneficial not only to yourself but also to everybody around you. You have to contribute with your dharma for the benefit and welfare of other people, rather than use it as a license to cause harm to other people. So I'll come back to this dharma in a little bit again, but for now let's move on. Next one is artha. Artha means different forms of wealth. Now, the moment we hear the word wealth, usually we think of money, right? Or the stock certificates that we own, or maybe the cars that we own and properties that we own. But in the yogic sense, anything that you need to draw upon in order to sustain yourself is considered as a form of wealth. Okay, so let me repeat that again. Anything that you need to sustain your life is considered a form of wealth in Vedic philosophy. And if you think about it, it makes perfect sense. How? For example, I may be the richest man in the world, but at the end of the day, I cannot breathe currency. I need healthy, unpolluted air to breathe, right? Similarly, I need unpolluted water to drink. I need healthy food to consume, right? So all of these should also be are also considered as a form of wealth in yoga. In fact, for that matter, yoga philosophy says that even sunlight is a form of wealth, right? Dhanam agnir, dhanam vayuhu, dhanam indro, dhanam vasuhu. This is what it says, meaning even sunlight is considered as a form of wealth in yogic philosophy. I mean, we are all, most of us are from Canada. We know many people get depressed during winter time when there is hardly, say 4 or 5 hours of sunlight, right? Why sunlight? So sunlight is important for us, for our existence. So in other words, wealth includes natural forms of wealth also, not just industrial forms of wealth. But unfortunately, as a race, we have been ignoring this, and we have been focusing on only industrial form of wealth. And that is why we have brought the planet practically to the brink of extinction, right? Our water is polluted, our air is polluted, greenhouse effects, all of these things are happening because our understanding of wealth is very narrow. It just came to mean the number of zeros that are there on my bank balance, right? So here we need to, even human relationships are considered as a form of wealth in yoga philosophy. So the idea is a balanced pursuit of all of these things is the second goal. Third one is kama. By the way, please note that this word is different from karma. There is no R in this. They rhyme very close to each other, but this is kama and not karma. Okay, there is no R in this. Kama means fulfillment of desires. Any kind of desire, including sexual desires also here. Many times people interpret this only as sexual desires, but that's not appropriate in this context. So any kind of desires that you have, maybe you want to have a 6-bedroom home, maybe you want to have a cottage in the lakes, Kavartha lakes or somewhere. So all of these desires will come under kama. So Vedic philosophy does not discourage us from pursuing our desires. Okay, there are some spiritual systems which say that you have to be poor if you want to be a spiritual person. Vedic philosophy is not one of them. Okay, it is perfectly okay to earn money to the best of your ability and also to satisfy your desires with that money. But the important thing, critical thing, in fact, that should not be forgotten is that all of this should be within the framework of dharma. That is why they mentioned dharma first. Okay, so if you are a yoga teacher, this I hear from many people in yoga community. They think that you have to be poor somehow. I try my best to convince them that that is not told anywhere in the yoga philosophy. If you are a yoga teacher, if you are a doctor, accountant, whatever it is, you work hard, benefit the society, benefit other people to the best of your ability and become rich. Nothing wrong with it. There is no incompatibility between being rich and being spiritual. Okay. So the idea is that it is not a matter of what you possess, but rather what possesses you. As long as that wealth does not possess you, it is okay for you to possess wealth. If the wealth begins to possess you, yeah, then there will be a lot of trouble, right? So there was a great yogi called Ramakrishna Paramahamsa. He said one time that it's okay for the boat to be in the water, but water should not be in the boat. Right? If water begins to seep into the boat, then the boat will sink. But it is okay for the boat to be in the water. Similarly, it is okay for you to possess wealth, but make sure that the wealth does not possess you. Right? So that is the idea. So last one is moksha. Moksha means self-realization, enlightenment, whatever you want to call it, liberation. All of these things are called as that word moksha. Okay, with freedom from the eternal cycle of life and death. So basically, these are the 4 things that are considered as the goals of life. Knowingly or unknowingly, we all pursue these things. Vedic philosophy, or Krishna in Bhagavad Gita, is clearly articulating these things for us. Okay, but otherwise, knowingly or unknowingly, we always pursue these 4 things. Okay, we try to figure out how to support ourselves, which forms within the broad framework of the word dharma. Next one is artha kama. We have some desires that we want to fulfill, have a good family, have a home, maybe have a decent retirement, whatever it is. And for that we need money. So we do pursue artha and kama. And lastly, moksha. Generally we neglect this, but it's a good idea to not lose sight of this. Now there is a lot of wisdom in the order in which these things are given to us too. So let me talk a little bit about that also. Let us imagine our life like a river, okay, like a flowing river. So there is obviously a lot of water in the river, and as long as the water respects the 2 banks, okay, then water will flow nicely and you can go fishing in it, boating in it, swimming in it, whatever it is. But if the river refuses to respect those banks, the shores, then what happens? A tsunami happens, a flooding happens, right? So if we consider our life as a river, as a smooth flowing water, then artha and kama are what keep it flowing. But dharma and moksha are like the 2 banks of this river. As long as that flow is respecting these 2 banks, then you know the river is safe to go inside. But if the river is flooding and it is breaking all the barriers and the banks and the shores, etc., then that's not a safe river. It is not safe for anybody to go into. So similarly, dharma, moksha, that is why they are mentioned at the ends. And artha and kama are mentioned within them. So whatever we do for the sake of artha, money, as well as kama for fulfillment of desires, they have to comply with and not transgress, okay, the dharma and the kama. So now here is an interesting thing from a human psychology viewpoint. And also this is where we make choices. It is quite possible to pursue artha and kama without respecting dharma, right? So there are many people who do undesirable things like selling drugs and stuff like that, child pornography and things like that, which are not strictly speaking in accordance with dharma, right? But still they make money that way. They, in other words, they pursue artha, they pursue kama. Of course, they being rich people, they can do whatever they want to do. All their desires can be fulfilled. So without dharma also, artha and kama are coming. Not that it is desirable, not that it's advisable, but there is that possibility. But without dharma, moksha ain't coming. Moksha is not coming. Okay. Without dharma, artha and kama can come. You can acquire them. But moksha is not going to come unless dharma is adhered to and followed. That is an important teaching in this order. Okay. So any questions on this so far, on these 4 things and 4 goals of life? Once again, this may not be a shocking revelation to anybody, but Veda definitely, Bhagavad Gita definitely clearly articulates for us what these things are and helps us understand them in a broad manner, as well as in a comprehensive manner. As I mentioned, especially artha, wealth, we think of it only as bank balance, but our money, but that is not quite correct. Okay, that is not in accordance with the vision of the rishis. Everybody okay so far? So I think we understood dharma a little bit. Now let us focus on what is called swadharma. Okay, dharma as a broad concept, fine. It is the framework of our life. Okay, everything that we do has to be within that framework of that is defined for our lives and so on. Now the question is, okay, great. As dharma as a global concept, as a macro concept is fine. But how do I figure out what is my dharma? First and foremost thing I want to point out, especially for people who are a little bit familiar with this word dharma. Dharma is not what you do. Dharma is what you are. That's the first thing to note about it. Okay? Dharma is not what you are, but rather dharma is not what you do, but rather dharma is what you are. And the idea is that what you do has to be in harmony with what you are deep within, not your psychological makeup or social status, not that kind of things, but deep within, whatever you are essentially, that has to, in a manner of speech, govern what you do in life. So what you do in life as a profession, as a job, as a calling, as a passion, whatever you may want to call it, basically has to be in harmony with what you are deep within. This is the most important thing to understand. A lot of times I hear people saying that, oh, doing this is I find is my dharma. Teaching yoga is my dharma. Teaching yoga is not your dharma. Teaching yoga is still your profession. The thing is, but that profession, that activity is hopefully in harmony with what you are deep within. Okay. So now the question is, then how do I know what I am deep within? That is the next question. So once again, dharma is not what you do, but rather what you are. Okay. And the idea is that what you do has to be chosen in such a way that it is in harmony with what you are. Now, the $1 million question is, how do I figure out what I am deep within? How do I know? There are many ways of finding out what you are deep within. In a manner of speech, it's a good idea to learn about at least a few of them and look at it from all of the viewpoint of all of these rather than follow one single factor. to determine what one is. One of those factors is basically to review your own life and figure out what is it that you value most in life. This can offer you clues into what you are deep within. Okay, so once again, what do you value most in your life? If you close your eyes, contemplate on it, think about it, meditate on it, you will realize. Now, let me give you a few hints, a few more insights into how to determine what you value most. If you look at it from a human societal viewpoint, there are 4 things that we value, broadly speaking. Okay, there are many little things, but broadly speaking, there are 4 things that human beings value. First thing is, some people value knowledge and wisdom above everything else, more than anything else. Okay, so for example, I can confidently say the people who are in this workshop, you all value knowledge and wisdom. That is why you are here. You committed your time, your money, your energy, right? All of these things you committed. Why? Because you value this knowledge. You value the wisdom. Okay. In ancient times, they used to use it more in the sense of spiritual knowledge, spiritual wisdom, which probably to a large extent applies even today also. But in the context of the modern society, maybe we can include all knowledge workers in this. Okay, people who value knowledge. So all knowledge workers means what? Artists, for example, they are knowledge workers, right? Yoga teachers, knowledge workers. All forms of teachers are knowledge workers. I mean, most of you are in Canada and especially in Ontario. I was reading an article last year sometime that teachers are one of the lowest paid professionals in Ontario. Maybe all over Canada, but definitely in Ontario. But still, some people want to become teachers. Why? Because they don't care much about money. They know that as a teacher, they are able to touch the lives of future generation, and they are able to shape their lives. They are able to influence their lives. So people still want to become teachers, even though they are not the highest paid professionals. You know, they can make a lot more money by becoming maybe a soccer player or a hockey player or whatever else is out there. But they still choose to become teachers. Why? They value knowledge, they value wisdom, and how they can positively influence the lives of an entire generation because of the knowledge and wisdom that they possess, and by properly sharing it, right? So people like yourselves, this is one dharma. In Sanskrit language, this is known as Brahmana, meaning one who values knowledge. Okay, it is there in the notes that I have sent you. No, maybe it is not there. So let me type this up for you in the chat window here. Okay. Brahmana means someone who values knowledge, values wisdom, and that is what they rather pursue above everything else. Okay, so this is the first thing. Second thing is known as Kshatriya. This is a little bit tricky to explain and create proper understanding in the minds of people in today's world. But Kshatriya means people who value political power above everything else. Political and administrative power, everything else. Once again, let me hasten to add something. I know many people hate politicians and politics, etc. But here, you know, if they are doing their jobs properly, they are like the protectors of the society, right? So maybe you can think of it that way, protectors of systems. Okay, these are the people who value political power. So this is called Kshatriya Dharma. Okay, these are the people, if they see something wrong happening on the street, they will stand up. They won't just walk by saying that, oh, this is not my business, and they won't walk away. They will stand there, try to get involved and try to correct that wrong that is being done. If they cannot do all of that, at least they will go home and write something on Facebook. I saw this happening today. This is not good. We should stand up for this, something or the other. They will make some noise, right? Because that's what they are concerned about, that everything functions properly. Everybody behaves in a just and fair and maybe even legal manner. all of these things. So this is called Kshatriya. Once again, please remove that negative connotation we have against politics and politicians. But ideally, kings or politicians in today's world, heads of state, all of these people are people who value Kshatriya. By the way, let me also link this dharma to what you should do in life. So people who value, who have Brahmana dharma, meaning who essentially value knowledge above everything else, these people should choose intellectual professions such as being teachers. Okay, any kind of teachers, school teacher, professors, or yoga teachers, whatever it may be. Teaching is a very, very good profession for them. It will give them a lot of satisfaction. Plus, it is also in harmony with what they value most. So I hope you are able to see the distinction between dharma as the essence of your being and what you do, what you choose to do in your life being in harmony with dharma. Okay, dharma is not what you do once again, but rather what you are. Similarly, arts, artists, musicians, poets, authors, okay, which includes these days, bloggers and all these kind of things. So all of these people, intellectual workers essentially, in a manner of speech, even people who do programming, software workers, okay, hardware workers, all of these things, doctors, engineers, okay, all of these things, all of these people will come under Brahmana dharma because they value knowledge. Now remember, whatever your dharma may be, ultimately you still have to pursue artha, kama, and moksha through them, right? As long as you live in the society, that is inevitable. But these are all the professions that will be in harmony with what Brahmana dharma, which is your essence inside. And it's a good idea to choose this kind of professions. Kshatriya, who I said are like protectors of the society, who want to make sure that everybody is safe and well and protected and so on. What should they choose? Jobs like military jobs, okay, police, being cops, etc. Part of the judiciary system, judges and things like that. Again, assuming that these are all doing their jobs properly and they know what is right and wrong, etc. Because nowadays a lot of systems are corrupt and so on, but we keep those things aside. We focus on the good aspect of these things. So this is the Kshatriyas. These are the professions or jobs which are suitable to Kshatriya dharma. Third one is Vaishya. These are the people, sorry, I typed it mistake. Sorry, the first one had an extra A, that's a mistake, typo. Vaishyas are the people who love money for the sake of money. I mean, everybody needs money, right? Even Brahmanas need money, teachers need money, Kshatriyas need money. Everybody needs money to survive in the society. But Vaishyas, for other people, money is just a tool to buy things and satisfy their desires, meet their needs and so on. Whereas Vaishyas love money for the sake of money. So these are the people who love wealth, different forms of wealth. So what should they do in life? They are very, very well suited to be businessmen. Okay, businessmen, stock brokers, insurance brokers, okay, bankers, people who deal directly with money for a living. Those are suitable for Vaishya dharma. Those are the activities suitable for people who are born with Vaishya dharma. Last one is Shudra, which is like a catch-all. Okay, so people who don't have any of these other things, they are called Shudra. These are mostly service providers. Okay, service providers are considered as Shudra. So people, all tradesmen, okay, like plumbers, electricians, construction workers, all of these tradesmen will come under Shudra. So someone who doesn't fall into any of the three will fall into the fourth one. Now the question is, how does this get determined, or how these things, how do I recognize this? Brahmana are people who have lot of what is called as sattvic energy. How many of you know what is sattva and what is sattvic energy? Okay. Sorry, how many of you know sattva, sattvic energy? Okay, some of you. So sattva, there are this concept of sattva, rajas and tamas in Indian scriptures. Sattva, rajas and tamas are like the threads with which the fabric of this entire creation is woven. Okay, so everything basically in the universe that you see is born of sattva, rajas, and tamas put together. These are subtle principles and energies. It is not easy to understand them per se, but we can understand them by their application, especially by the impact these three things will have on our mind. Okay, so let me approach it from that viewpoint to help you understand what sattva, rajas, and tamas are. Sattva is, by the way, for those who don't know how to spell these words, I'm writing them here. Sattva, rajas, and tamas. So people who have, if your mind, let us say, as I mentioned, it is not easy to understand them per se, these concepts, but we can understand them by their influence on our minds. So when my mind is under the influence of sattva, that is when I feel focused, concentrated, and I am mindful of everything that I'm doing. I am at my best, creative best, and even productive best. Okay, so sattva is often compared to light, and it is considered as most desirable among these three energies: sattva, rajas, and tamas. Okay, so from a psychological viewpoint, from a behavioral tendency viewpoint, sattvic people are very calm people, very quiet people. When they speak very quietly, very calmly. They won't stir up your emotions. They try to appeal to your good sense, to your logic, and so on. So these are all hopefully they are giving you an idea about what sattva is and what sattvic energy is. Even everything in the universe can be sattvic, rajasic, or tamasic, meaning one's behavior can be sattvic, rajasic, or tamasic. One's food, the food that we consume, can also be sattvic, rajasic, or tamasic. Even the music that we listen to can be sattvic, rajasic, or tamasic. Even our favorite color actually is determined by the mixture of sattva, rajas, and tamas that one has deep within oneself. That is how deep these three things go as far as this universe is concerned. Next one, rajas. So when rajas is acting on my mind, the principle of rajas, the energy of rajas is very active in my mind, then that is what makes me hyperactive. Okay, I am running around trying to do 100 things at the same time. This is all the influence of rajas. Boredom, similarly mood swings. Okay, all of these things are caused by rajas. Rajas is what drives you. Sattva doesn't drive you. Okay, rajas drives you. So being hyperactive, trying to accomplish multiple things at the same time, but hardly getting maybe 1% of them done. These are all usually signs of rajasic energy. So rajas drives you crazy, but at the end of the day, it tires you down. Whereas sattva helps you maintain a sense of balance throughout your active hours of life. Let me put it that way. Last one is tamas. Tamas, people from a psychological or behavioral viewpoint, rajasic people, they are capable of stirring up your emotions. In fact, that's how they speak, right? They say, "Oh, is this what that guy said about you? You have to do something about it. You cannot keep quiet." That is how they will try to drive you also. So this is basically rajasic. And when they speak, it is all about themselves, right? Oh, I did this, I did that, I achieved this, I achieved that, I solved this problem, that problem. Lot of ego within themselves. This is usually rajasic temperament. As I said earlier, our food can also be rajasic. Music we listen to can be rajasic. In fact, a lot of things that we see around us, they are rajasic in temperament. They always keep driving us. It is very difficult for us to take a pause, say no to things, and sit quietly. Why? Because too much of rajasic energy all around us. Next one is tamas. Tamas is basically the kind of energy that will make me very lazy, lethargic, right? I don't want to change. I don't want to get up from this couch that I'm sitting on and teaching. This is the kind of energy that tamasic principle will create within my mind-body system. So tamasic behavior is about always criticizing other people. This is tamasic behavior. Criticizing other people, insulting them, okay, finding faults in other people. This is all tamasic behavior. So everything in the universe is can be sattvic, rajasic, or tamasic. Quite literally everything in the universe. So the idea is that the mixture of this sattva, rajas and tamas is what creates these brahmana, kshatriya, vaishya or shudra tendencies within us. Okay, those who have lot of sattvic karma, they prefer, they are born with brahmana dharma. Okay, so brahmana dharma means, once again remember, pursuing wisdom, especially spiritual wisdom, but at least preferring intellectual activities in terms of modern society and the way we work in today's world. So people who have lot of sattvic karma, sattvic energy within them, they should always pursue knowledge working channels, whatever they may be, either teachers, artists, and so on. People who have quite a bit of sattva, but also little bit of rajas, they should pursue kshatriya dharma. They are born with kshatriya dharma, and they should pursue those kind of activities or careers or professions or calling or passion, whatever word you would like to use. People who have lot of rajas and little bit of tamas, they pursue vaishya. People who have lot of tamasic energy, they pursue, they are born with shudra dharma. Okay, normally, again, these are, I mean, we are defining them as cut and dried separate things, but it is very difficult to see such a cut and dried thing in any human being, because we have all of these three things, sattva, rajas and tamas, and at times we are sattvic, at times we are rajasic, at times we are tamasic. So it is a little bit of a challenge to see which one is born with. So all we can do is, okay, majority this person has this much, this is the dharma that the person has, that much we can do. So once again, sometimes even just sitting down quietly, contemplating upon your life, review your life so far, will also give you clues as to whether you have sattva more, rajas more or tamas more. Analyzing oneself very, very openly and in an unbiased fashion can reveal whether you have brahmana dharma within you, kshatriya dharma within you, vaishya or shudra. Once again, it's not like somebody can have 100% brahmana or 100% vaishya like that. There is always a mixture of them, but one of these things will definitely predominate, and that will govern the scheme of your life. Okay, not the little things that may happen here and there, etc., but the overall scheme of your life will be governed by these things. One other tool, very useful, is astrological chart. So in Indian astrology, Vedic astrology, they have certain ways of figuring out what is the predominant dharma that a person is born with. Is it brahmana dharma, kshatriya dharma, vaishya dharma or shudra dharma? This also will be very, very helpful in figuring out what is one's path in life. So the idea is that our path in life is governed by this this dharma, this essence that with which we are born. So it is a good idea for us to learn to recognize what is my essence and make sure that whatever I do in life is in harmony with the essence of myself. Okay, this is a lesson, believe it or not, I learned in a very, very hard way personally in my own life. Okay, but anyway, if it is okay with you, I would like to share that, but maybe not today, maybe in the next session. Okay, before we wrap up, any questions about these dharmas? And first of all, is that idea sitting well with you, that dharma is not something that you do, but dharma is something that you are? Okay, sorry, who is anyone has a question? No questions? Everything is okay? Okay. So if we apply this to our given story of Arjuna, what do you think Arjuna is born with? What is Arjuna's dharma? Based on your understanding of these four kinds of dharmas.
He values knowledge.
Arjuna? Okay.
I mean, he's on the battlefield, so he is also a warrior.
He's actually born and brought up as a warrior. He's not a knowledgeable, he's not exactly after knowledge. He's asking Krishna for knowledge and for advice just because he's confused. Okay, when this war is taking place, by the time the war is taking place, they are all in their 70s. Okay, Krishna, Arjuna, all these guys were in their 70s. So all these years he couldn't care less because he was a warrior, he was a fighter, right? He didn't want any knowledge. But for the first time in life, he's confused whether to fight this battle or not. So he asked Krishna a question, whether should I fight or not. Otherwise, he never asked in all the 70 years. And they were close friends and cousins. So they used to play together. They went to, discotheques together and went to pizza places together. But he never asked Krishna any of these occasions. Okay, it's not like they are seeing each other for the first time. So, but in the 70 years of life, for the first time, he's asking Krishna this question. So it's a little bit difficult to imagine that it's a Brahmana dharma he has. He's a Kshatriya, he's a warrior, right? Back in the day, these were kings, right? He's basically a king, correct? He belongs to the royal family and so on. So that means they are Kshatriya. Kshatriya is often very unfortunately translated as warrior into English. Very, very insufficient and inappropriate translation. Kshatriya means someone who protects dharma from being wounded. That is the literal meaning of that. Kshata means wound in Sanskrit language. Okay, so dharma being wounded. Dharma, again, remember, means what? Moral, ethical code. And in modern world, we can even include the legal into that, although that's a lot controversial thing now. So someone who protects dharma is a Kshatriya. Okay, so he's actually a Kshatriya. Why? Because he is supposed to, as a warrior, even if you translate it as a warrior, he is supposed to fight for the people who are incapable of fighting for themselves, who cannot fight for themselves, right? So that is a Kshatriya dharma. But actually in the chapter 1 of Bhagavad Gita, when he's expressing his confusion to Krishna, he actually tells Krishna literally that, you know what, I don't want to fight this battle. I'm not in, I'm very, very confused why I want to kill my own family members, etc. in this battle. So he actually says that I want to give up this battle, this whole kingdom, all of these things, and I want to become a monk. He literally says that I want to become a monk and go sit under a tree and live off of the charity offered by people and so on. That means what? He is trying to become something that he is not. That's something that his essence will not permit him to be, right? He's a Kshatriya. He's born with a lot of Rajasic energy, right? All of a sudden, if you want to become a monk, you need a lot of Sattvic energy to be a monk. Otherwise, you won't be able to sit quietly and meditate even for 5 minutes. Forget meditating like monks do for hours and hours, right? So probably my guess is that is what sets Krishna off, that Arjuna is trying to be something that he is not. So in fact, Krishna, during the teaching, he says some place very, very clearly, Swadharme nidhanam shreyaha paradharmo bhayavaha. So Krishna says that whatever your dharma is, you should follow that dharma. Okay, so whether you are born with a Brahmana dharma, Kshatriya dharma, whatever it is better to follow your path than follow some other path. Swadharme nidhanam shreyaha, meaning it is better that you die following your dharma than follow somebody else's dharma and live. Okay, that may be a little bit extreme statement for our times, but regardless. So the idea is that what you are and what you do, if they are not in harmony with each other, there will be a metaphysical emptiness within you that will haunt you.
But
okay?
couldn't you also argue?
You may be becoming rich by doing whatever you are doing. Your desires may be fulfilled, etc. But your life will not feel a sense of fulfillment. Fulfillment of desires and fulfillment of life, these are two different things. A lot of times in modern times, we get confused. Motivational speakers, self-help gurus, they're all driving us to achieve our, for fulfillment of desires. But there is something called fulfillment of life. And that can be, I'm not saying that is, that can be different from, and in most cases it is different from, fulfillment of desires. As I said, I learned this lesson very, very hard way in my own life, and I'll share that with you in my autobiographical session next week. Sorry, I don't mean to scare you. It's not going to be autobiography, 5 minutes. But important thing is that Sreyan Swadharmo Vigunaha Paradharmat Swanushthitat, meaning it is a good idea that you do your dharma, you follow your dharma, even if it is imperfect, rather than you follow somebody else's dharma even perfectly. Oh, that is why Krishna says it is better you die following your path than live following somebody else's path. Sorry, Miri, please ask the question now.
No, sorry about disrupting. No, I was just thinking, in my logic, I would think he was in a disharmony with being Kshatriya, and that's why he had these doubts about being what he is. That's why, because the first time he's in a battle with his family, with his own kind, he thinks, oh, am I actually, he's having a crisis with his dharma, right, with his being.
Yeah. No, but let me correct that a little bit here. It is not like he is in disharmony with his dharma. It is that he is ignorant of his dharma. Okay? His judgment is clouded at this moment because of his attachment to his family, right? So therefore, he has become temporarily, at least, ignorant of his dharma. It is not like he's in disharmony with his dharma. He just doesn't know what is dharma. Remember, dharma also includes what is the right thing to do under a given set of circumstances and at a given point of time. So that is also part of dharma, right? So he doesn't know what is his dharma. It is not like he knows, but he's in disharmony. He just doesn't know what is the right thing to do under these circumstances. So that is why he's seeking Krishna's help. Okay. So Krishna is trying to enlighten him about his dharma, because Arjuna is confused about what his dharma is right now. All right, if anyone has any other burning questions, I will take them now. Otherwise, we'll continue this next session. Leslie has written a nice remark. These systems apply nicely for those who have a sense of right, but keep wondering how applies to those who are evil. I have no answer to that, Leslie, because the idea is that, yes, everything applies to a person who is trying to be decent, reasonable, and follow a system and look for not only his personal benefit, selfish benefit, but also for the benefit of everybody. There is, if somebody chooses to be a lawless person, there is no point in teaching them about law. Okay, but nonetheless, regardless of the choices that make, because people do choose to be so-called right or evil, whatever they may mean. But these principles apply to everybody. We may choose not to respect them, not to subject ourselves to them. It is just like a law in Canada, right? So one of the laws in Canada is that we should all drive on the right side of the road. Now we have a choice. Do we choose to drive on the right side, or we choose to drive on the wrong side? Each one has its consequences, right? If you choose to drive on the right side, hopefully you will have a safer journey than if you choose to drive on the left side. Of course, for people in UK, it is the other way. So the idea is that these principles are universally applicable. There is no exception. But some other factors come in which make us choose otherwise. So that is of course a different question, definitely relevant and big question. But that needs to be considered separately. All right, so let me wrap up this session. Once again, thank you very much for taking time and attending. We have one more session left where we will talk about, again, life as a whole. And so far we kind of focused on karma, how karma shapes our dharma, and how dharma should guide our choice about what we do in life, what we do with our lives. Okay, we'll continue this discussion next session. Hopefully it is proving to be interesting and enlightening to everybody. Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to stop the recording now.